Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our asynchronous session. And this time I'll be discussing to you the biogeochemical cycles. At the end of this video lecture, students are expected to describe the series of steps involved in a biogeochemical cycle and explain the impact of humans on biogeochemical cycles. What is all about the biogeochemical cycles? Biogeochemical cycles involves biological, geo- geological, and chemical interactions by which matter moves in a cyclic form from living organisms to the abiotic environment and back again. The cycles are carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and water as a representative of all biogeochemical cycles. These are important to organisms because they involved materials used to make the chemical components of the cells. And we all know in our basic science, basic biology, cells are considered as the simplest structure of a living organism. The carbon, nitrogen, and water have gaseous component, but phosphorus has no gaseous phase. Thus, only local cycling of phosphorus occurs easily. The first cycle that we are going to tackle is the carbon cycle. Carbon cycle refers to the global movement of carbon between the abiotic environment and organisms. And your carbon cycle, the carbon is the pivotal molecule in the process. Large molecules essential to life contains carbon, and these are components of proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. So these four macromolecules are very important in the living system. The carbon is present in the atmosphere by means of gas in a form of carbon dioxide or the CO2, which makes up 0.04% of the atmosphere. As what you can see here, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon is also present in oceans and fresh water by means of the dissolved carbon dioxide, as what you can observe in this figure. Carbon is also present in rocks, such as limestones, in a form of calcium carbonate. The chemical symbol of calcium carbonate is CaCO3. Let us now focus on the different steps of the carbon cycle. And I want you to focus your attention in this structure, okay? And this term, photosynthesis. So during photosynthesis, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere fixed to form a complex organic materials such as glucose. The chemical symbol of your glucose is C6H12O6. Remember in our photosynthesis, the products of your photosynthesis are oxygen and glucose. Plants use these byproduct to produce a complex carbohydrates such as cellulose that are present on the cell wall of the plant cell, starch as a source of energy of plants that are mainly present in tuberous plants, and at the same time with our root crops like cassava, like sweet potato. Also, these byproducts include amino acids and other compounds. Once these glucose consumed by animals, the process of respiration and chemical breakdown of materials of animals, microorganisms from soil, and decomposers returns the carbon dioxide to the atmosphere and in the soil. Similar also to the aquatic ecosystems between aquatic organisms and dissolved oxygen in the water. Millions of years, vast of coal beds formed from trees that were buried and subjected to anaerobic conditions and decayed are deposited in our terrestrial and at the same time in our marine ecosystem. The anaerobic conditions that I am referring is that the condition where no oxygen is present. In the marine ecosystem, oils of marine organisms gave rise to a deposit of coal, oil, and natural gas, which we call as the fossil fuels. And based on studies, they say that these fossil fuels are plenty of it in the Burnham Rise and at the same time in West Philippine Seas. Remember that fossil fuels are non-renewable resources. That means it's finite. As time goes by, the deposits will deplete and until the Earth's limit to supply was reached. Coal, taken from the fossil fuels, are used in the industrial plants. So the process of burning of combustion returns again the carbon to the atmosphere in a form of carbon dioxide. Combustion of fossil fuels or combustion of natural gas in diesel power plants combustion happens in order for the fossil fuel to convert into electricity that we usually use in our households, offices, and restaurants or other establishments. Example of this diesel power plant is located in Panay, which is located in Dingle, Iloilo. Going back to our discussion, during combustion, the carbon released to the atmosphere was rapidly oxidized. That means it combined to the oxygen to form carbon dioxide. In the marine ecosystem, shells of marine organisms that sinks to the ocean floor and sediments cover them, forming the seabed deposits. So the deposits eventually cemented to form limestone. A limestone is a sedimentary rock. And millions and billions of years, the sedimentary rocks may lift from the bottom of the seafloor to form land's surfaces. In geology, it is called as geologic uplift. Example of geologic uplift is the Mount Everest summit that consists of sedimentary rocks. Then, the exposed limestone or the sedimentary rocks will again erode and return to the carbon or return the carbon to the water and atmosphere, which again available to the cycle. Remember, in the carbon cycle, photosynthesis removes carbon from the abiotic environment. And cellular respiration of animals, combustion of the fossil fuels, combustion of organic materials, and erosion of limestone will return carbon to the water and atmosphere of the abiotic environment. Now, what are the human activities that disturbed the global carbon budget or that disturb the normal or the balance of carbon in the environment? First, of course, burned tremendous amount of coal, oil, and natural gas to obtain energy. Like what I have said in the previous slide, that we tend to combust the diesel from fossil fuel in diesel power plants to obtain energy that supplies electricity in our households and other establishments. In contrast, more combustion of wood and fuel released carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at greater than the natural carbon cycle can handle. Too much combustion of wood when we cook our food in our homes, burning of agricultural wastes and burning of household waste will contribute on the release of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in a greater amount. Increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere causes global warming and thus could result to the rise of sea levels, change in the precipitation patterns, death of the forests, extinction of organisms, and problems in agriculture. As what I've said in our previous lectures, video lectures, it will cause a domino effect. It will cause everybody to suffer on its consequences. Another cycle is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is essential part of proteins, nucleic acids, and chlorophyll of plants. The nitrogen or the nitrogen gas or the N2 is 78% in the atmosphere. Nitrogen molecule is said to be stable in chemistry. It is said to be stable, which do not readily combine to other elements to form a complex compound. In the cycle between the abiotic environment and organisms has 5 steps. First is nitrification. Second, assimilation. Third, ammonification. Fourth, denitrification. And nitrogen fixation. Remember that bacteria may include in the steps of nitrogen fixation, nitrification, ammonification, denitrification, but not in assimilation. Let us now focus our attention in this illustration. We all know that 78% of nitrogen gas is present in the atmosphere. And the first step of the nitrogen cycle is the nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation forms ammonia or the NH3 from nitrogen gas, which is the N2. So this process, again, is known as your nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixing bacteria here, the nitrogen fixing bacteria that includes cyanobacteria and other free-living and symbiotic bacteria carry on biological nitrogen fixation in soil and aquatic environments. Most of the leguminous plants has a symbiotic relationship with these nitrogen fixing bacteria. And in leguminous plants, notice that in their roots, there are nodules. And in that nodules, there are presence of nitrogen fixing bacteria. All of the leguminous plants. Example of leguminous plant is our peanut. Nitrogenase is the enzyme that break up the molecular nitrogen and combine the resulting nitrogen atoms to hydrogen, forming the ammonia or the NH3. The second step of the nitrogen cycle is the nitrification. Nitrification is the process of converting ammonia produced in nitrogen fixation or the ammonium to a nitrate. Okay? The nitrates. So, there are two processes of nitrification. First, the soil bacteria converts ammonia to nitrite, which is NO2. And the second stage, the nitrobacter oxidizes nitrite to form nitrates. And again, the nitrification process furnishes by another bacteria. And the name of that bacteria is nitrifying bacteria. The third step is the assimilation. During this stage, the root of the plants will absorb the ammonia, ammonium, and nitrate that produced by nitrogen fixing bacteria and nitrifying bacteria. So these compounds will combine to form proteins, nucleic acids, and chlorophyll of the plants that are also essential for the plants to grow. As animals consumed plant tissues that are rich already of proteins, nucleic acids, and other compounds, They assimilate nitrogen by taking these plant nitrogen compounds and convert it into animal nitrogen compounds. So it's already in the system of the animals. Next step is the ammonification. Ammonification is a conversion of organic nitrogen compounds into ammonia and ammonium ions. It begins when organisms produces nitrogen containing waste materials like urea in the urine and uric acid in waste of the birds, and at the same time fecal matters of the animals. Then the bacteria that performs the ammonification in both soil and aquatic environment is called as your ammonifying bacteria. Ammonifying bacteria then will convert the products into ammonia produced, will use in the nitrification and assimilation again in the process. Okay? Last is the denitrification. Denitrification is the reduction of nitrate or the NO3 to gaseous nitrogen. And the bacteria that reverse the action of nitrogen fixing bacteria and nitrifying bacteria by returning nitrogen to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas is called the denitrifying bacteria. Anaerobic lived and grows best in no free oxygen environment and usually near the water table. To summarize the stages of nitrogen cycle, again, first step is the nitrogen fixation, wherein the nitrogen fixing bacteria is the one that converts the nitrogen gas to form ammonia. Second step is the nitrification, wherein it converts ammonia or ammonium to nitrate. And it has two processes, wherein first, the soil bacteria converts ammonium to nitrite, and the second, the nitrobacter oxidizes nitrite to nitrate. And the bacteria is said to be the nitrifying bacteria. The third step that does not require the action of bacteria of the bacteria is the assimilation. Again, assimilation is the process by which roots of a plant absorbs the ammonia, the nitrates being produced by the nitrogen fixing bacteria and the nitrifying bacteria. That means it will be consumed by the plants, and the plants will be consumed by the animals to form their own specific proteins. The fourth stage is the ammonification, wherein the conversion of the organic nitrogen compounds into ammonia and ammonium ions. Where does it come from? From the manure and from the parts of the animals and parts of the plants. And the bacteria that performs ammonification is said to be the ammonifying bacteria. The last step is the denitrification. Denitrification, as what I've said, it is the reduction of the nitrate to gaseous nitrogen. And the one that performs denitrification is the denitrifying bacteria. And this is usually in anaerobic environment. That means there is an absence of oxygen. Now, what are the human activities that change the global nitrogen budget? Increased usage of nitrogen fertilizers produced from nitrogen in the atmosphere by industrial plants for agriculture causes water quality problem. Once this nitrogen go to the bodies of water, especially stagnant bodies of water, it will nourish the water and promote algal blooms, and it will cause what do we call as eutrophication. And it can contaminate also our groundwater once there is what we call runoff. The next cycle is the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus cycle does not exist in a gaseous state. Thus, it does not enter the atmosphere. Your phosphorus cycle only cycles in the land to sediments in the ocean and back to the land. First, water runs over rocks containing phosphorus, erodes the surface, and carries off organic phosphates. The erosion of phosphorus rocks will then release phosphate into the soil and used up by roots of plants to form inorganic phosphates. And these are inorganic phosphates in the plants. Animals usually obtain most of their required phosphorus from the food they eat. And what do they eat? Of course, plant parts. These plant parts are rich of inorganic phosphates needed by the animals for their bodily functions. Of course, it includes humans. Now, the dissolved phosphates enters the aquatic ecosystem through absorption of algae and aquatic plants. So we have zooplanktons. That means these are planktons that are animals and larger organisms. Zooplanktons will be eaten by mollusks and variety of fishes. And the phosphorus present in our zooplanktons will be transferred to the mollusk and other fishes. Once these mollusks are eaten by a larger animal again or another aquatic animal, it will be passed on to that larger aquatic animal. And if these mollusks and larger aquatic animals die, decomposers will then break down the parts of these aquatic animals, and at the same time will break down the waste materials of these organisms to release phosphate in the water, which made available for usage again. And remember that there are aquatic plants that may use up the phosphate in the water already. The phosphate from water returns to the land by means of wastes or manures of birds that contains large phosphate and nitrate and used up by plants. How? Because also birds, remember, eat these fishes that eats zooplanktons that are rich of phosphate. So it is just a specific stage or stages that may transfer phosphorus from one trophic level to another trophic level. Once birds eat these fishes, they will acquire again the phosphate. And their manure, which is rich in phosphate, will then be released in the terrestrial ecosystem. And later on, it will be used up again by the plants. And that actually the normal cycle of phosphate in the environment. It usually occur in land and at the same time in water, but not in the atmosphere because phosphorus that does not have its gaseous state. Also, some phosphates carried by rivers and streams to the ocean where it is deposited on the seafloor and remains for millions of years. And again, here comes the geologic uplift that may someday expose these phosphates by means of new land surfaces and once again used in the cycle. Then phosphate deposits from birds are also mined for agricultural use in phosphate fertilizers. Now, what are the human activities that affect the natural cycle of phosphorus? Phosphate mined and used to make fertilizer, which applied to corn growers. The corn contains phosphate absorbed from the soil may be used to fatten our cattle, and wastes of these fattened cattle may eventually wash into the rivers and cause eutrophication. Soil erosion causes loss of phosphate from the soil and carry to oceans, which remains in millions of years. Next cycle is the hydrologic cycle, or also known as water cycle. Hydrologic cycle is a complex cycle which provides a renewable supply of purified water for use by terrestrial organisms, including humans. Water is said to be a very important to maintain life. All species, from bacteria to plants and animals, use water as a medium for chemical reactions, for transport of materials, and for moderate climate. Water continuously cycles from ocean to the atmosphere to land and back to the ocean again. Water moves from the atmosphere to the land and ocean in the form of what we call precipitation, in forms of rain, snow, and hail. Water here evaporates from the bodies of water and soil condenses and forms cloud. Okay, it will form clouds in the atmosphere first from the surfaces on the earth's surface, from the ocean seas. It will undergo evaporation and will form condensation, and it will form cloud through the process of condensation. And also, in the plants, we have the term transpiration or transpiration. The transpiration of plants adds an amount of water vapor to the atmosphere. 98% of water absorbed by plants from soil is transported to the leaves where it is lost by this process known as your transpiration. Runoff of water from land surfaces, okay? Runoff of water from land surface to ocean and other bodies of water like rivers and streams will take place. Water that percolates or seeps down in the soil becomes our reserved groundwater. And we have the term aquifer. Aquifer, it is an underground hollows and porous layers of rocks in which groundwater is stored. Groundwater may stay in the ground for hundreds and thousands of years, but will eventually supply water to soil, stream, and rivers. The problem now is the aquifer depletion. Aquifer depletion, wherein high amount of removal of groundwater by human beings that than the amount of precipitation or melting of snow recharges our soil or our groundwater. So what are the activities that might affect the balance of water in our ecosystem? Of course, too much use of groundwater. Like for example, like in our homes, in respective homes, we don't use water wisely. We tend to increase consumption of water in our households, in our workplace, in our schools. These will these activities will deplete our groundwater. I guess this is the last slide of my discussion. This is a simplest form of that shows the hydrologic cycle from evaporation, from evapotranspiration to form clouds in a process of condensation, and then precipitation, runoff, infiltration going to groundwater. So this is a typical hydrologic cycle or water cycle. I would like also to add on that these different cycles are normal cycles. But we once we integrate already and we don't use it wisely, it will greatly affect our living. It will greatly affect our environment. So thus, I am asking from everybody that each one of you must understand these basic concepts and apply these in your day to day living in order for us to help the environment. By helping the environment, we also helping ourselves to survive. If we continue exploiting our environment through our activities, all of us will suffer. Remember that nature exists without human beings, but human beings cannot exist without nature. And again, remember, think not what you can do. I mean, think not what nature can do for you, but what you can do for nature. And let us not be selfish. By preserving our environment, we preserve these resources for our younger generation. So I guess I made myself clear to everybody. So I am expecting for the feedback regarding with this video lecture and regarding with the lessons in the module 2. So thank you for your kind attention and have a nice day, everyone.